I stepped over the first puddle, the black fluid clinging to my worn boots like cold tar. It smelled of burnt sugar and wet stone, a scent that clung to the back of my throat as I pressed forward. The mist clung to the carnival tents, their faded ochre canvas slick and heavy with rain that wasn't water. It dripped from the edges in slow, viscous beads, each drop hitting the puddle below with a sound like a fat insect hitting glass. Drip, drip. The distant oscillating resonance vibrated up through the soles of my boots, a low thrumming in my bones that matched the frantic pulse behind my eyes. I adjusted the strap of my map case, the leather stiff with damp, the familiar weight a small anchor against the growing unease. The abandoned cart sat near the skeletal frame of the Ferris wheel. Its wooden wheels were half sunk in the black sludge, and the cart itself was draped in a tattered ochre cloth, resting on it a cat. Not a stray, but a cat that pulsed with a faint, low electrical hum. Its fur, a dull, burnt sienna, crackled softly as raindrops hit it, sending tiny sparks of static into the mist. Fzzz. The sound was like a dry leaf skittering on glass, yet it vibrated the air around me. The cat's eyes, wide and unnaturally still, watched me as I approached. Its hum deepened, a resonant whevan that seemed to sync with the oscillating resonance, making the mist shiver. I stopped a foot away. The cart's shadow stretched long and thin across the slick ground, distorted by the black fluid. I reached out, fingers brushing the cool, damp wood of the cart's side. The cat's fur flared, a sharp fur crackle, like snapping dry twigs, and the electrical hum spiked. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot up my arm from the wood. Zap! I jerked back, my knuckles tingling, the taste of ozone sharp on my tongue. The cat didn't move, its hum settling into a deeper, more deliberate frin-thrum thrum-thrum, like a slow predatory heartbeat. Flint splinter. The sound came from the Ferris wheel's sharp, dry crack-crack, echoing through the downpour like wood giving way under unbearable stress. I flinched, my hand instinctively going to my map case. The echo of a conversation I'd never had 20, a woman's voice distorted, whispering should have taken the east path. Should have taken the east path. Flint seemed to vibrate in my skull, a phantom sound woven into the resonance. Flint have taken the east path. Flint ignored it, focusing on the cat. Its stillness was a challenge. It was measuring my fear the way a gambler measures the edge of a card. I took a slow breath, the damp air thick with the smell of wet canvas, and that cloying burnt sugar. The cat's fur glowed faintly with the hum, casting tiny shifting sparks onto the black puddle. The cart's shadow, previously a simple extension of the wood, began to sever lengthen, not just longer, but unnaturally formed, stretching, the edges blurring as if the mist itself was pulling it towards me. It flowed across the slick ground, the black fluid parting silently before it. The shadow reached towards my boots, elongating with a silent, viscous pull, the very shape of the cart's frame distorting in the mist, stretching towards me like a grasping hand made of darkness. The electrical hum of the cat deepened, a low, satisfied thrum. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The Ferris wheel groaned again, a deeper fir-tree creak this time, as if the skeletal frame was finally surrendering to the weight of the storm. The shadow stretched, reaching. The rain hammered the tin roof of the funhouse like 1,000 furious fingers, the sound muffled but relentless beneath the warped, ochre-painted planks. Genevieve Kramer pressed her palm against the bathroom door, the wood warped from decades of steam and neglect, the grain rough under her fingertips. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of bleach and something older rust, maybe, or the damp rot of forgotten things. She flicked on the flickering fluorescent light, its buzz a low, uneven hun-hum that vibrated in her teeth. The tiles beneath her boots were slick, the grout black with grime, and the mirror above the sink was a broad, steamed-up slab of warped glass, its edges peeling away from the frame like sunburned skin. She exhaled, a sharp fricassee through her teeth, and pressed the heel of her hand against the glass. The condensation ran in slow, viscous rivers, the steam curling upward in ghostly fingers. The mirror's surface was a blank canvas, until it wasn't. The etched letters appeared one by one, as if carved by a blade of ice, fifindied me at the hole of mirrors. The words were jagged, uneven, as if written in haste or by a hand that didn't quite know how to hold a tool. Genevieve's fingers twitched. She'd seen this before, messages that weren't meant for her, or so she told herself. But the way the steam shivered around the edges of the letters, the way the air above the glass seemed to tway through 'em, like a plucked wire, made her stomach tighten. She wiped the rest of the condensation away with her sleeve, the fabric rough against her skin. The oscillating resonance, that goddamn resonance, pulsed in her bones, a deep, rhythmic frithrum, thrum, thrum. that hadn't been there a second ago. The mirror's reflection rippled, not from her movement but from something 20 feet chewed. The glass. The bathroom dissolved into a corridor of warped ochre walls, the floor tiling stretching endlessly, the ceiling pressing down like a lid. The air in the reflection was thick, stagnant, the way it gets before a storm breaks. Genevieve's breath hitched. She hadn't taken a step. The mirror hadn't moved, and yet the reflection was no longer hers. She turned toward the funhouse's main hall, her boots sticking slightly to the wet tiles. Each step sent a sharp fuddy crack through the air, not from her weight but from the glass beneath her. Horse shatter, like ice breaking underfoot. The sound echoed, layered as if a dozen footsteps were stomping in unison behind her. She didn't look back. The doors to the Hall of Mirrors loomed ahead. Their frame painted the same faded ochre as the rest, the wood swollen with moisture, the hinges groaning as she pushed through. The air inside was still, too still, the way a held breath feels before you exhale. The mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces fractured in a web of cracks, each shard catching the dim light and throwing it back in jagged, distorted bursts. The reflection in the nearest mirror wasn't hers. It was a version of herself, but wrong. Her hair too long, her face stretched too thin, her eyes hollow pits. She reached out, fingers brushing the glass. The reflection didn't flinch. Instead, the cracks in the mirror spread, like veins splitting open, the glass groaning as if alive. The sound was a wet, tearing splinter, the shards receding into the wall, leaving her reflection suspended in a web of fractured light. Genevieve's pulse hammered in her throat. She took another step forward, her boot sole scraping against the tiles. Shatter. The sound split the air, and the reflection in the next mirror Fidsi moved. Not mirroring her, but stepping Fidri through the glass, her own hand pressing against the other side. The cracks in the mirror widened, a slow, deliberate unraveling, the glass hissing like steam on hot metal. Behind her, the funhouse doors groaned shut, the sound a deep, final twin-click-click, like a vault sealing itself. The resonance pulsed again, deeper this time, the walls of the hall shrimp breathing, with it the mirrors flickering in unison. And then, in the center mirror, her reflection took a step forward, into the glass. The cracks sealed behind her, the shards reforming into a perfect, unbroken surface. The air in the hall stilled. The only sound was the slow, deliberate fuddy-twendy of something wet falling from the ceiling. Genevieve's breath came in short, sharp bursts. She didn't move. The reflection in the mirror smiled a wide, predatory grin that didn't belong to her, and then it raised a hand, beckoning. The reflection's fingers, too long, too sharp, sliced through the air where my face had been a heartbeat before. A splinter of glass detached from the mirror's edge, spinning like a tiny blade before embedding itself in the ochre wall behind me, the impact sending a ripple of dust motes spiraling downward. My boots skidded on the slick tiles, the soles slick with something darker than water, the stench of copper and old ink rising with each step. The resonant swiven thrummed again, this time deeper, vibrating through the floorboards, through my teeth, through the rolled-up maps tucked into my coat pocket, maps that had once traced the veins of cities, now reduced to smudged sketches in the margins of my notebooks. I ducked into the alcove, the space barely wider than my shoulders, the walls lined with more mirrors, their surfaces warped like the skin of a melting wax figure. The air here was thicker, cloying, the scent of burnt sugar and something metallic clinging to the back of my throat. My fingers brushed the wall, the texture rough under my palm, the ochre paint flaking away in thin, brittle sheets. Behind me, the main mirror cracked too, not with a single clean break, but with a wet, tearing sound like fabric rending under strain. The reflection lunged again, its movements jerky, unnatural, as if its limbs were made of stiff wire. I twisted away, the hem of my coat catching on something sharp, the edge of a shattered map, the paper yellowed with age, the ink blurred as if washed by time. The tear was clean, precise, the sound a dry fritsnap that cut through the resonance, like a knife. The reflection's voice slithered into my skull, not through my ears but through the marrow of my bones. You could have charted the stars. The words weren't spoken aloud. They were sifted to me, a whisper coiled around the edges of the unheard conversation, the one that had played on repeat since I was 12, the one where my father's voice had dripped with disappointment. You'll never be more than a cartographer of back alleys, Genevieve. You'll never see the sky. The echo of it pressed against my temples, the sound of it a jagged staccato. In my mind, the syllables stretching, warping, until they became something else entirely, a chorus of voices, all saying the same thing, all laughing, all disappointed. I pressed my back against the wall, the ochre crumbling under my fingers, the dust settling in slow spirals. The reflection was closer now, its breath fogging the air between us, the scent of it like ozone and something older, something hungry. The mirrors around me flickered, the cracks in their surfaces pulsing like veins, the glass breathing bus. My hand fumbled for the bottle in my coat pocket, the one I'd taken from the funhouse's abandoned prop room, the one that held a preserved echo, a sound so old it had no name. The glass was cold under my fingertips, the liquid inside it thick, viscous, the color of wet ash. I uncorked it, the sound a wet twin plop, and the scent of it filled the alcove, burnt and sweet, like the last embers of a fire that had long since gone out. The reflection's smile widened, its teeth too white, too perfect. The kind of smile that belonged on a postcard of someplace I'd never been. You could've, it said again. The words dripping like syrup, but you didn't. The cracks in the mirrors behind it spread, the glass hissing as it split apart, the shards receding into the walls like teeth sinking into flesh. The resonance went toward this time, a deep, oscillating friend wail that shook the very air, that made the maps in my pocket flutter, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I raised the bottle, the liquid inside it was shimmering, and hurled it at the reflection. The glass shattered against the mirror, the liquid spreading like ink in water, the echo inside it screaming, a sound that wasn't a sound. That was just one pressure, just one weight. Just the kind of thing that made your bones ache. The reflection fawn screamed with it, its mouth opening too wide, its eyes too black, the cracks in the mirror sealing around it, the glass reforming, smoothing itself out like skin knitting over a wound. The resonance twin cut out abruptly, leaving only the sound of my breath, ragged and uneven, the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs, the sound of the reflection's voice, now a whisper, now a breath against my ear. You could have charted the stars. The curio room smelled of mothballs and something older, like the last breath of a man who'd spent his life dusting the same corners. Genevieve ran her fingers along the edge of a glass cabinet, the surface slick with grime, the grooves of her palm collecting the fine powdery residue. Inside, rows of yellowed bottles lined the shelves, their labels peeling like sunburned skin. She didn't need to read them. She'd memorized the layout the night before, when the Carnival's owner had left her alone with a key and a warning. Some things shouldn't be opened. It was smaller than the others, its glass thick and clouded with a swirling silver mist that didn't settle. Genevieve unscrewed the cork with deliberate slowness, the sound a wet fin plop that echoed in the hollow space behind her ears. The mist slithered out in thin, tendril-like strands, coiling around her wrist before hovering just above the palm of her hand. It wasn't cold. It was one wrung, like the moment before a storm when the air presses against your skin, heavy with the promise of something breaking. A voice emerged from the mist, not spoken but twenty unfolded, syllable by syllable, as if her own throat had been split open, and the words were dripping out. Unmapped futures. What is, it said. Her voice, but not her voice, distorted, stretched the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. The words hung in the air, thick and viscous, and for a heartbeat, Genevieve saw herself standing in a field of tall grass. The sky a bruised purple, her hands trembling as she held a compass that didn't point north but twinsied ways, as if the world had been tilted just enough to make direction meaningless. She blinked, and the vision was gone, leaving only the scent of damp earth and the ghost of her own breath. The cat was there before she noticed it. It didn't slink or pad, it hummed into existence, a low electrical buzz that vibrated through the soles of her boots, through the floorboards, through the marrow of her bones. Its fur stood on end, each strand crackling with static, the color of it shifting between black and something darker, something like the space between two shadows. The hum rose in pitch, a steady, insistent droning that made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. Genevieve exhaled through her nose, the sound a sharp fiffisee that cut through the room's silence like a knife. Then the music started. Not the resonance, the real thing. A carnival tune, warped and slow, the brass section wheezing like an old man trying to catch his breath. The notes slithered through the cracks in the walls, seeping into the room like ink in water, drowning out everything else. Genevieve's fingers twitched toward the bottle, but the vision was already there, pressing against the inside of her eyelids like a handprint, her childhood home, untouched. The kitchen table still set for supper, the plates holding cold roast beef and mashed potatoes, the hallway clock its hands frozen at 7:30, the way they'd been the night she'd left. Her father's voice clear and sharp as a blade. You'll never be more than a cartographer of back alleys, Genevieve. You'll never see the sky. She turned, and he was standing in the doorway, his reflection stretched and warped behind him, his smile too wide, his eyes too black. The bottle in her hand shattered. The sound was a dying heartbeat. Thump, 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 each beat slower than the last, the mist from the bottle spreading like blood across the glass shelves. The cat's hum cut out abruptly, the silence that followed so deep, it tepped. Genevieve's breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers still curled around the jagged edge of the broken neck. The air in the room thickened, pressing in on her from all sides, the scent of burnt sugar and something metallic filling her lungs. Then she saw it. The reflection in the shattered glass, not hers but Tivicida. A stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, his face half hidden in shadow, his eyes burning like embers. He smiled and the glass sieve sealed around him, smooth and unbroken, as if he'd never been broken at all. The cat moved ahead, its paws making no sound on the warped linoleum, the hum in its fur a low, relentless vis-des that vibrated through the hollow bones of the carnival stalls. Genevieve followed, her boots sticking slightly to the floor, each step pulling free with a wet Thivenchwechlik, like she was walking through syrup. The air smelled of burnt copper and something older rotting wood. Maybe, or the scent of a stage after the final performance when the lights had been left on too long. The reflections in the glass of the stalls flickered like dying fireflies, faces melting and reforming, a woman with too many teeth, a child with eyes like polished river stones, her own face stretched thin, her lips pulled back in a grin that wasn't hers. The static in the air thickened, each breath she took crackling like the last embers of a fire. The cat paused at the entrance to the hall of mirrors, its body rigid, the hum rising to a sharp, discordant whine. That made her teeth ache. She stepped inside, the door groaning shut behind her like a held breath finally released. The mirrors lined the walls, each one warped and uneven, their surfaces slick with a sheen that wasn't moisture, but something thicker, something alive. Her reflection wavered, doctor's hands steady over a patient's chest, a traveler's calloused fingers tracing a map, a painter's brushstrokes bleeding across canvas. Each image flickered, the light dimming and brightening like a faulty bulb, the possibilities of a life she'd never lived pressing against the edges of her vision. The cat slinked forward, its fur bristling, the hum now a steady electric drone that hummed in her bones. It stopped at one mirror, its gaze locked on the reflection within. Genevieve stepped closer, her shadow stretching long and thin behind her, the glass warping her form into something jagged, something not quite right. The reflection showed a forest tall, gnarled trees, their branches knotted like fingers, the ground beneath a carpet of moss so thick it swallowed the light. She'd never mapped this place. The air in the reflection shimmered, the scent of damp earth and something metallic filling her lungs. The cat's hum cut out abruptly, replaced by a sharp, metallic snap, the sound of a compass needle breaking, the final ticking of a clock that had run out of time. The forest reflection dissolved, the glass rippling like water, the edges of the mirror peeling back to reveal a door behind it. It was old, the wood dark and splintered, the hinges rusted but still, as if they'd been waiting for something. Genevieve reached out, her fingers brushing the surface, the wood cold and rough beneath her touch. The door groaned open, the sound a slow creaking sigh that echoed through the hall of mirrors behind it. Darkness. Not the absence of light, but something thicker, something that pressed in on her from all sides. The cat's hum returned, low and steady, its gaze locked on the doorway, its fur crackling with static, the reflection in the glass warping, twisting, its eyes burning like embers in the dark. The door resisted, its splintered wood groaning like a joint stiff with arthritis. Genevieve's fingers ached from the cold, the rough grain of the frame digging into her skin as she pushed. The hinges shrieked. A sound that wasn't metal but something wet, something tearing, and the darkness beyond exhaled, thick and suffocating. Not the dark of a closed room, but the dark of a mouth opening. Waiting. She stepped through. The air inside was thick with the scent of burnt sugar and rust, the kind of smell that clung to the back of her throat. The walls weren't walls at all, but a labyrinth of mirrors, each one warped like a funhouse distortion, but deeper, more deliberate. The reflections didn't just twist her face, they rearranged it. One showed her standing at a drafting table, ink-stained fingers tracing a map of continents she'd never explored. Another had her in a lecture hall, a chalk in her hand, students leaning forward in rapt attention. A third showed her on a stage, a violin bow gliding over strings, the notes pure and perfect. Each version of herself smiled, but none of them looked like her. The ticking started in her chest first, a slow, deliberate click-click-click, synchronized with her pulse. She pressed a hand to her sternum, felt the rhythm beneath her palm, the way it pulsed like a second heartbeat. The sound grew louder, filling the space between the mirrors, echoing in waves. Tick, tick, tick. The reflections rippled, the images shifting like water disturbed by a stone. The cartographer dissolved into a woman in overalls, her hands calloused, her sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The lecturer became a chef, her knife flashing in her grip. The violinist, her reflection figured, screamed at the sound swallowed by the glass. Genevieve moved forward, boots scuffing against something soft, something punrong. The floor wasn't solid. It was a shifting maze of paths, each one leading somewhere else. The ticking grew louder, filling her skull, vibrating through her teeth. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass of the nearest mirror. The reflection inside faint moved, a version of herself stepping back, eyes wide with something like fear. A dead end. The path behind her sealed shut, the mirrors merging into a single, unbroken surface. Her reflection stood there, smiling, lips parted just enough to show teeth that were too sharp, too perfect. The ticking stopped. Silence then. A crack. The mirror behind her split down the middle, the fracture spiderwebbing outward with a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The glass peeled back, revealing not another mirror but the skeletal remains of a carnival ride, its metal frame rusted black, its seats sagging like the ribs of a corpse. The rain outside had turned to something viscous, black and glistening, dripping from the edges of the ride in slow, thick streams. The lights flickered to life red, then blue, then green, each color bleeding into the next, casting her reflection on the rain in jagged, distorted shapes. The hum started low, a vibration in the air, in her bones. The ride creaked, the sound of metal protesting under weight, under free movement. The reflections in the mirrors stilled. The smile on her reflection's face widened. And then, the ride began to turn. The oscillating resonance swelled, a low thrum in the metal bones of the ride. It wasn't a sound so much as a pressure against my eardrums, a vibration that seemed to loosen something deep within my skull. The rain, viscous and black, plastered my hair to my forehead, the smell of burnt sugar and rust intensifying. Each drop felt heavy, clinging to my skin like a film. The reflections in the mirrors shimmered, no longer static portraits but fractured glimpses of a life that wasn't mine, a life I'd abandoned. The first wave hit a crack, like ice shifting underfoot, and the carnival warped. The rusted metal of the ride blurred, the sagging seats resolving into a drafting table littered with crumpled paper. The scent of burnt sugar faded, replaced by the dry, acrid smell of old ink. I saw my hands, younger, steadier, tracing lines on a map of the Amazon basin. A map I'd never finished, a map I'd abandoned after a patron deemed it lacking ambition. The memory wasn't mine yet. It felt intimately familiar, a phantom limb aching with unrealized potential. A flicker of irritation, a dull hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. The ambitious, he wanted a conquest, not a cartography. The resonance pulsed again, a drawn-out whirr, and the drafting table dissolved. I was standing in a dusty office, the air thick with the smell of mildewed paper. A rejection letter lay on the desk, the crisp white paper a mocking testament to my failure. The words swam before my eyes, blurring into an indistinct accusation. We're not original enough, not compelling. A tremor ran through me, a subtle vibration that echoed the oscillating hum. I wanted to argue, to defend my work, but the words caught in my throat. The cat, a dark smudge against the black rain, padded silently ahead, its form seeming to ripple with the distorted light. It led me back towards the hall of mirrors, the laughter of unseen children echoing faintly from somewhere beyond the ride. Another wave, a brittle snap, and the reflections shifted again. This time, I saw myself lying on a cold stone floor, a sheet pulled over my face. A coroner's face hovered above, his expression neutral, clinical. The smell of formaldehyde stung my nostrils. A soon-to-die failed cartographer, a cautionary tale. The thought wasn't my own, yet it resonated with a disturbing truth. I stumbled forward, the black rain slicking the floor beneath my boots. Each step felt precarious, as if the ground itself might dissolve. The ticking, long absent, returned, a faint click-click-click synchronized with the pulsing resonance. It was a metronome counting down to something I couldn't comprehend. The reflections grew more chaotic, a swirling vortex of failures and regrets. A lecture hall, a violin, a stage, each vision fleeting, incomplete, a cruel mockery of what could have been. The cat stopped before a particularly large mirror, its tail twitching rhythmically. I looked into the reflection, expecting to see my own face, weary and rain-soaked. Instead, I saw a corpse, a pale, lifeless version of myself, lying on a gurney, eyes vacant, lips slightly parted. The image was disturbingly clear, the details chillingly precise. The rain seemed to intensify, the black droplets clinging to the glass like tears. A low, guttural foon-hum emanated from the reflection, a sound that seemed to vibrate within my very bones. The resonance peaked a shattering 40 crack, and the reflection corpse reached out. A hand, cold and clammy, pressed against the glass, fingers slowly extending, reaching. They grazed my neck, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of icy dread through my body. The rain poured down, obscuring the reflection, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The cat emitted a faint electrical sevzesti, its eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. The cold pressed against my skin, a damp weight. The scent of formaldehyde, acrid and clinging, filled my nostrils. Above me, a face to neutral, clinical 20 hovered, observing. The image of myself, lifeless on a gurney, felt less like a reflection and more like a premonition. The rain hammered against the glass, a relentless percussion against the silence of the room. The ticking, that insidious metronome, accelerated, a frantic pulse in the oppressive quiet, digging. The sound, subtle at first, grew, a scraping, shifting rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. It wasn't a sound I heard but felt, a tremor in my bones. The resonance, usually a constant companion, had vanished, an unsettling absence. It left a void, a pressure in my skull that felt like a phantom limb. I fought against the image, the coldness, the sterile smell. It was a memory, a projected fear, but the visceral reality of it threatened to overwhelm. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. I tried to move, to push against the invisible weight, but my muscles protested with a dull ache. The scraping intensified, closer now, the sound of earth being displaced. Dirt, wet, cold, a sudden fuff and whumph, and the vision fractured. The cold stone dissolved into the familiar, warped reality of the carnival. I stumbled, catching myself on a nearby wall, the texture rough and damp beneath my fingertips. The room had shifted again, transforming into a vast library. Rows upon rows of books stretched into the shadows, their spines a uniform, faded ochre. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and binding glue. A single beam of light illuminated a section of shelves, highlighting titles I recognized of cartography texts, historical atlases, geographical surveys. All books I had once intended to read, to master. The sound returned, soft at first, then growing in intensity, the rustling of pages. A gentle twinge shush that filled the silent space. It was a comforting sound, almost hypnotic, but the memory of the gurney lingered, a bitter taste in my mouth. I wanted to reach out, to grasp one of the books, to lose myself in the promise of knowledge. But a sense of dread held me back. The resonance remained silent, the absence more terrifying than any cacophony. The fush-shi of turning pages grew louder, faster. A frantic flurry of paper, each rustle felt like a condemnation, a reminder of my failures, my abandoned ambitions. Originality. Compelling. Ambitious. The words echoed in my mind, a chorus of disapproval. I wanted to shout, to argue, to defend my work, but the words remained trapped in my throat. The library seemed to shrink, the rows of books pressing in on me, suffocating. I turned, searching for an exit, a way out of this suffocating prison of unrealized potential. The cat was there, perched atop a towering stack of books, its dark form silhouetted against the fading light. It watched me, its eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. The fush-shi of pages abruptly ceased. A sudden, absolute silence descended, amplifying the pounding of my heart. The resonance remained absent, the silence a tangible pressure. The ground trembled, a subtle vibration that ran through the floor, up my legs, into my core. The tremor intensified, a low rumble that resonated in my teeth. It wasn't violent, not a quake, but a subtle shifting, as if the very foundations of the carnival were rearranging themselves. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. The books around me seemed to vibrate, their spines humming with a low, almost imperceptible frequency. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then, slowly, subtly, the cat's fur began to glow. A faint, pulsating red light emanated from its dark coat, casting long, distorted shadows across the library floor. The silence was a living thing, pressing against my ears like wet fingers. No wind, no rustle of canvas, no distant Calliope melody. Just the thick, suffocating absence of sound. I exhaled, and the breath fogged the air in front of me. A fleeting ghost. The cat's hum had sharpened into a low, insistent thrum, vibrating through the soles of my boots as it padded ahead, its fur bristling with static. The Ferris wheel loomed in the mist, its skeletal structure slick with black rain, each gondola dangling like a broken promise. A whisper of wind, no, not wind, a sigh, slid past my neck. The air warped. The carnival dissolved into the backstage of an old theater, the stage set with props I never touched, a tattered map of a coastline that didn't exist, a compass frozen at 187 degrees. My younger self stood center stage, arms outstretched, her voice a hollow echo in my skull. Asterisk, you were supposed to finish this. Asterisk, the words weren't spoken, but I felt them in my teeth, the weight of them pressing down. I reached for the map, fingers closing on air, and the ink bled across my palms, black and viscous. The cat's thrum pulsed, a warning. I shook my head, blinked, and the theater was gone. The Ferris wheel stood again, its metal groaning like a dying man. The reflection in its gondolas wasn't mine. It was a stranger, a version of me with a smile too wide, lips peeled back over teeth that glinted like broken glass. Asterisk, you left them all behind. Asterisk, it murmured, voice dripping from the surface of the metal. The hum of the cat sharpened into a scream in my bones. A heartbeat, not mine. A slow, deliberate thud, thud, thud. In the silence, syncing with the rhythm of my own pulse, my chest tightened. I pressed a hand to my ribs, felt the steady press of blood beneath my skin. The reflection in the nearest gondola leaned forward, its smile stretching, lips parting over a black void. The heartbeat stuttered. My vision swam. The cat's hum was a blade now, slicing through the silence. I stumbled forward, boots sinking into the mud, the Ferris wheel creaking as if waking from a dream, the reflections in every surface, mirrored panels, wet tops, the black sheen of the rain. Twisted, their faces melting into the same predatory grin. The heartbeat stopped. And then they moved all at once. The reflections peeled away from their surfaces, limbs uncoiling like smoke given form. The younger version of me lunged from the Ferris wheel gondola, fingers raking toward my throat. The stranger with the glass teeth sprang from the mud, its breath reeking of copper. The cat's hum became a roar, a storm of static, and the carnival itself seemed to tremble. The ground beneath my feet shifting like tectonic plates grinding together. I turned to run, but the reflections were already there, hands closing around my wrists, my ankles, their touch cold and unyielding. The Ferris wheel groaned, its metal screeching like a dying thing, and the black rain fell harder, obscuring the world in a suffocating dark. The last thing I saw was the cat, its fur pulsing with crimson light. Watching as the reflections dragged me under, the glass screamed. Not a single shard, but a chorus of splintering, 1,000 tiny knives tearing through the air. Black rain, thick as tar, pattered onto the broken fragments as they rained down around me. The sound was sharp, brittle, yet muffled by the weight of the downpour. I stood rooted in the center of the sudden crater of glass, mud sucking at my boots, each step a slow surrender to the earth. The cat's hum was gone, replaced by a hollow silence where its static had vibrated through my bones. The reflections, those grinning, glass-teethed versions of myself, were gone too, dissolved into the rain-slicked shards. Only the broken mirror fragments remained, each catching the bruised twilight in the mist, reflecting the Ferris wheel's skeletal frame back at me in 1,000 fractured pieces. The black rain fell harder, each drop hitting the glass with a soft faint plink-plink alike, like beads of ink on a dark surface. I looked down. The glass beneath my feet wasn't just broken, it was splint-forming. Shards aligned, edges glinting with the faintest burnt sienna sheen, creating a path that led toward the nearest gondola. The path wasn't random, each fragment angled just so, reflecting the Ferris wheel's warped structure, the faded ochre of the carnival's peeling paint on the ground. I took a step. The glass beneath my right boot cracked with a dry snap, but the path held. Another step, the left foot. Snap. The sound was unnervingly quiet, swallowed by the rain. The air smelled of wet iron and ozone, the scent of the storm that never let up. I walked, the broken glass whispering beneath my soles, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. The path led me past the Ferris wheel's base, where the black rain pooled in the rusted metal grooves. My reflection flickered in a shard near my ankle, a pale face, eyes wide, the ghost of the woman who'd stood on stage in the theater. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the rain-slicked mud. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Then, from somewhere deep in the mist, a sound, not the rain, not the wind. A dry rustle like parchment unfurling, a sound that had no business here. It came from the map case strapped to my hip, the one I'd carried since the beginning. The map inside it was supposed to be a secret, a cartographer's map of a coastline that didn't exist. Now, it was unfolding in my mind, the sound a silent, internal thing shush-shush that vibrated in my molars. The rustling grew louder. Shush, shush, shush. It wasn't the map. It was the sound of the map unfolding. It filled the space where the reflections had been, where the cat's hum had been. The Ferris wheel groaned, a deep metallic sigh, but the rustling drowned it out. The sound was impossibly loud in the sudden stillness, a dry, paper-like whisper that echoed in the hollows of my skull. I stopped walking. The path of glass stretched ahead, ending at a final full-length mirror embedded in the wet canvas of a collapsed tent. The reflection in it was mine, but the edges were blurred, dissolving like ink in water. I stepped toward it. The glass path crunched softly underfoot, each step a tiny fracture. The rustling sound reached its peak, a crisp, fuddy unfurl, then stopped. Absolute silence. Not the absence of sound, but a thick velvet quiet, like the world holding its breath. The only sound left was the faint, persistent twish-shift of tectonic plates beneath the Carnival, a vibration felt more than heard. I reached the mirror, my reflection was clear for a single suspended moment. Then, as I lifted my hand to touch the glass, the reflection of my hand began to fade, not melt to vanish. The fingers dissolved into the black rain, the skin turning to mist, the bones dissolving into nothing. I saw the outline of my hand, then the emptiness where it had been. I stepped through the glass. The last thing I heard was the map's silent unfolding, then nothing. Only the shift of the earth beneath my feet, and the sound of my own hand gone.